be with you during this presentation. Before we begin, some house cleaning things to identify. If you're joining me in Zoom, please mute by default. But please also use reactions. If you're on LinkedIn, similarly, use reactions. I love reading your responses during the workshop and after the workshop. If you have any questions, comments, or thoughts, please leverage the chat, whether you're on Zoom, whether you're on YouTube, whether you're on LinkedIn. And lastly, be prepared. Be ready to take some notes. The good news is, if you are interested in the slides or the video, both will be made available to you afterwards. And if you want them even quicker, feel free to email me and I will get those items right to you. Now, what about questions? If you have questions, you can A, wait to the Q&A portion of our time together, or B, you can use the chat. As I mentioned before, I'll be reading from the chat on a regular basis, so feel free to look at that. Or 3, there is a feedback form at the end of this presentation. Feel free to take a look at that and put your question there. I will respond to it in about, I'll end up responding to it in about one business day or so. If you're wondering what is on the screen here, if you want slides or if you want anything, right, you can always feel free to email me, adam.thomas@hey.com. Always there for questions, comments, thoughts. And lastly, if you have a challenge with strategy, metrics, or team development, grab your phone, scan that QR code. It'll lead you to a short form where you can fill out what your needs are, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. Now, that form is going to be pretty quick. It'll only take about a minute. So once you do that, you can fill it out, and then you can get back to me, and you can get back to the presentation. It should be fine. What are we doing today? In the workshop, we're going to go through 5 sections, our introduction. We're going to talk about why your metrics don't work. We're going to talk about racking your metrics, and I'll define that. We'll go to feedback, and then we'll do Q&A. And with that, let's begin. W. Edwards Deming, world famous engineer, once said, "A bad system will beat a good person every time." And if you are a product person, if you are a designer, if you are an engineer, you may have outlined what the important numbers are inside of a system. However, the system is going to win unless you are very clearly able to delineate and communicate those numbers to the rest of the organization. What does that have to do with metrics? Well, metrics are a communication tool. I think the biggest failure for teams as it relates to numbers is a lack of understanding that they are there to communicate something. What are they there to communicate? We'll go deeper into during this workshop. But the thought I want to leave you with this slide is the fact that every number that you use is a communication tool. It's communicating something to someone. And if numbers aren't communicating something to someone, then they are useless numbers. Speaking of communication, if you work in the startup space, the number one reasons that startups fail is not targeting the right problem. And it's often driven by bad communication, which is driven by bad metrics. Your ability to tell a story with numbers and then leverage that story to change direction when it matters is the number one thing that you need to get a grasp of in order to avoid the number one reason for failure for startups. That's how important understanding numbers are. That's why we talk about metrics all the time. That's why people uh, almost ad nauseum speak about metrics and numbers and being data driven. Being data driven is a way for you to avoid the not serving a customer, not communicating a good outcome. And why is that? Why? What's stopping us from communicating? A lot of the metrics that we have tend to be mystified, meaning they make sense to us, but to everyone else, they can feel like a legend. So, what I want us to do in this workshop is I want us to take a look at metrics that may be mystified, and then we want to move that from mystic to reality. We want to take the numbers that we have and turn them into something real. And in that way, uh, your good numbers can overcome a bad system. So let's start with metrics. Our metrics not working. How do you know if your metrics are mystified? Well, the easiest way for me to identify if someone's metrics are mystified is that they have too many. Human beings can only keep track of a certain amount of information. We're not machines. We don't have hard drives. We have brains, and brains can hold a limited amount of information. So, in that spirit, what I'd like for you to do, if you're here with us in Zoom, or if you're here with us on LinkedIn, or if you're watching this in the future somewhere else, I want you to think about a metric, and I want you to just take a stab at saying what's the most important metric that you want to talk about today. What's the thing that you need to communicate? And so I am going to give you about 2 minutes, and I want you to just write a metric in the chat. I want you to write the metric. I want you to write why it's important. And just for fun, tell me how many metrics are being tracked in your company or team right now. See you in a few minutes. All right. Wow, there's some interesting answers here in the chat. We have number of active users. We have customer adoption and retention rate. Uh, in the students, we have a student trying to track customer retention. And the answer that I think is far more true than not true is my company doesn't measure anything. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. How you can start to think about how to start measuring something. But to that point, yeah, a lot of companies don't measure anything, which is a problem. Now, we have one of the points that I like to bring up is Miller's Law. Miller's Law is a psychological principle by George A. Miller. It's often summarized as the magical number 7 plus or minus 2. Basically, what this means is we can keep uh, 7 pieces of information in our minds at once. And so it is really important to prioritize which pieces of information that you want people to store. So when people talk about KPIs or they talk about, uh, a North Star metric, that's what they're getting at. You need something that gets people to think about the direction that you're going in. So if I want you to keep anything in mind from this first section, it's that, hey, uh, if you have metrics, one thing that's useful to do is, especially if you see them everywhere, just have a running list of them. That's going to help you determine which ones are important and which ones are not. Remember, metrics are here to communicate something. So if you have numbers that aren't communicating anything to anyone, they're safe to get rid of. They're safe to not think about. They're safe to not reference. Um, but because of Miller's Law, you can have 7 plus or minus 2. Now, we have a lot of conversation in the chat about measuring, not measuring. And this next section should help. And whatever other questions you have, please get them queued up for Q&A, because I have a lot of thoughts on this topic, some of which may be out of scope, but could be helpful. But let's talk about racking your metrics. Oh, okay. It's hard to see? Okay, let me fix that. My apologies. I wonder if this... No. Okay, let me do it. Yeah, I can't do it that way. What? Okay, let's try this. Maybe this will do. Okay, is this better? Oh, wait. Okay, that's better. Okay. Sorry about that. Well, let's get to it. So we're talking about mystified metrics. Let's put a little bit of definition around that. What are mystified metrics? Well, mystified metrics often come from a lack of prioritization. We don't know what's important, so we have no clarity. There's a lack of movement. There's no decisions happening with those metrics, and there's a lack of understanding. It defaults to hippo, highest paid person's opinion, or there's no tension. We're not having a discussion about those metrics. They just exist. All of these metrics are basically letting us know that there's no there. We're not communicating anything. It's just mystified. So whoever comes into the room can define those metrics. Right? If you're wondering why the boss gets to say that, right? Not just because they're the boss, but also because we haven't really defined anything. We're not really pushing together in the same direction. And so my hope is today we can talk about moving from metrics that overwhelm, don't create stakes, and make sense to some, to metrics that are focused, give a sense of time, and can adapt to who's looking at them. We mentioned, and so I mentioned RACT earlier, RAQ. And this is what RAQ is: relevant, adaptable, quantifiable. Relevant. Metrics are relevant if they're able to help a team decide if they are usable with the current strategy. Adaptable. These are metrics that are designed to inspire action. And then quantifiable. These are metrics that can be used across the across the company. So when you ask about RAQ, that's what RAQ means. Let's talk about relevancy. And I think this is something that can help if you haven't tracked anything. The exercise that I'm going to talk about here is a way for you to start thinking about how to. We start with relevancy. Ask yourself a couple of questions, or prompt yourself and say, all right, what are we tracking? What could we track? And then you ask yourself, we need to measure this because. This is how you focus on a problem. We need to measure X because it is stopping our users from doing Y. We are trying to accomplish this because what are the goals that we're trying to get to? This is a bit outside of the scope of this presentation, but goals shouldn't be about revenue. Goals should be about tangible things that your team can do in order to get towards a particular outcome. And next is, in order to make this measure move, we need to do X, Y, and Z. What is it that we need to do in order to make this move? I'm going to make this more tangible now by giving you a framework. So the framework that I have is called push, pull, verb. And so with any number that you can think of, if you put it through the push, pull, verb concept, you'll get a much clearer picture of what that number is, how it helps solve a problem, what goal does it move us towards, and what are some things that we can do to affect that goal. It's a way of breaking down your metric in a way that can help you identify what is relevant. And if you have no metrics, if you start pulling numbers that you're tracking or pulling numbers that you feel are important, you can start to craft a conversation. And so what is it? Push. Push is the problem. What is the problem that is pushing us towards tracking a number? For example, if I'm talking about churn rate, I can say high churn rate indicates customer dissatisfaction. Nice, simple. Pull. What are the goals or objectives or outcomes that we're looking to do should this metric be successful? Well, we want to reduce churn by 2% in the next quarter. And then verb. What are some things that we can do that influence that metric? We can reduce churn by improving customer service. And so what I'd like for you to do is to take the next 5 minutes, and I want you to take the metric you mentioned earlier and put it through that process: push, pull, and goal, and push, pull, and verb. And if you don't have a metric, try to think of something you need to measure and try the same exercise. Or think about a problem that your company is trying to solve right now and start there. Just think about the problem, think about where you're trying to go, and think about verbs. And maybe that'll start to help you think about a number that is tied to those verbs. I'll give you 5 minutes, and I'll see you in a bit. So really happy with some of the results here. What I'm hoping this exercise is doing is it's helping expand your mind as it relates to what the problem is. What are we here to do? What are some uh, what are we what are we here to accomplish with the pull? And then some verbs, right? What are some actions that we can take on? Because ultimately what we're looking for is a compass. Good metrics become a compass for us to see if we're going in the right direction. It's communicating direction. And what the push pull verb exercise does, whether you do it or you sit down with your team and do it, is it lets you know what do people think is relevant. And then once you settle that up, now you can start to build a compass and to go talk to other people and say, okay, here's the problem. Here's the number we're tracking. Here are some things that we're doing. And so folks can understand directionally what's happening with you. Adaptable metrics, right? Our metrics are here to drive action. It's not just enough to tell people directionally where you're going. You want to help them get there. And so metrics that are adaptable let teams know what is changing. People are busy, we act on change. We are focusing on churn, for example. Then you want to set the stakes. Busy people, we act on time. Our churn rates need to change in the next 2 weeks. And then last, you want to connect it to strategy. We're busy people, we act on plan. And so give people a reason. Our strategy is all about retention. A way to do this is to think about taking that metric and writing and filling it out with these three concepts. What is the old state of the metric, and what are we turning it into? What does success look like? What's the time period? We need to complete the change in X amount of time. And then what is our strategic goal? Over the long haul, what are we trying to do in the next 6 to 12 months? What's important to us? And so if you can put that metric in that context, you're going to start to make it adaptable. People are going to start to know how to prioritize the work that they're doing based on that metric. And so I want you to try it. I'd like for you to try to take the metric that you were talking about here in the chat and make it adaptable. And then post it in the chat. I have a template right there on the exercise to help. See you in a few minutes.